very clear about something. If you watched this entire series and walked away thinking this is about writing prompts, then we need to reset right now, because this is not what we just built. What we built is a system that makes AI useful inside a real business. Not smarter, not faster, but useful. If your team has to ask someone for basic information, you do not have a system. You have a workaround, because most small businesses are not struggling with access to AI. They're struggling with how to use it in a way that actually changes how the business operates. And that's why this was never about tools. We're not teaching you a new platform. We're not teaching you through features. We are showing you how to take whatever AI assistant you already have, be it ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, and make it work for your business. The way we did that was by building a system that removes interpretation. Because, friends, interpretation is where consistency breaks. And when consistency breaks, performance follows. I'm Bridget C. Lewis, and I work with small and mid-sized businesses to bring structure to how they manage people, trading, and benefits, so decisions are consistent and performance is not dependent on who is in the room. At the beginning of the series, most people were focused on one thing: getting better output out of AI. You wanted stronger responses, more complete answers, something you could actually use. And that led to a very natural assumption: if I just ask better questions, I'll get better results. That sounds logical, but it's incomplete. Because what most people don't realize is this: AI does not struggle because it lacks intelligence. AI struggles because the business lacks clarity. And when clarity is missing, the prompt becomes a guessing game. So what do people do? They keep rewriting the question, they keep tweaking the wording, they keep trying to fix the output. But the problem was never the wording to begin with. The problem was the input didn't reflect the reality in a structured way. And if the input does not reflect reality, the output can't support the business. So what were we actually building? Well, let's define it clearly. We were building a repeatable system for how your business defines, processes, and responds to real operational situations. That's it. A system that takes something messy and makes it usable. And it does that through a simple but powerful structure. First, we define the environment. What kind of business is it? Who's involved? What are the real conditions this decision is happening inside of? Second, we define the situation. What's actually happening? Not the assumption, but the reality of what is happening. And third, we define what the business needs. What should happen next? What does good look like? What decision needs to be made or supported? That structure is what makes AI useful, because now the input reflects reality, and when the input reflects reality, the output becomes usable. That's the system, not a prompt, not a trick, a repeatable way to take any situation in your business and turn it into something that can be understood, decided, and executed consistently. And that matters more than most people think, because in small businesses, problems are rarely unclear, but they are almost always undefined. Let me show you the difference. A manager says, "We have a communication issue." Sounds like a problem, right? But it's not usable, because what's actually happening? Who's involved? What decision broke down? What should have happened instead? Until those questions are answered, there is nothing to fix. There is nothing to train. There is nothing to standardize. So what happens? Well, we get temporary solutions, right? Every fix becomes situational, and the same problem shows up again, just wearing different clothes. What we built interrupts that cycle. It forces the business to slow down just long enough to define the situation, the environment, the expectation, the decisions. And once that is defined, you don't just get better answers, you get repeatable outcomes. That's the difference between a tool and a system. Now, Let's talk about what's actually happening inside most small businesses, because this is where everything clicks. Most businesses are not operating from a shared definition of how things should work. They are operating from memory, habit, and individual experiences, which means two managers handle the same situation differently. Two employees receive different guidance for the same task. Two departments respond to the same issue with a completely different priority. And nobody stops to reconcile it. So over time, the business starts to drift, not in a dramatic way, but very subtly. A little inconsistency here, a slightly different decision there, a workaround that just makes sense in the moment, until eventually there is no single version of how the business operates. There are multiple versions that change depending on who is working, what shift it is, what location it is, and how urgent the situation feels. Let's make this real. Think about an assisted living environment. A resident refuses to take their medication. So you have one caregiver who will document it and notify the nurse immediately. But another might try to persuade the resident and wait a little bit to see if they will take it later. And yet a third will mention it when the shift changes, but doesn't really log anything in detail. Same situation, three different responses. And here's the part that we need to make explicit. Every single one of those caregivers is doing what they believe is the right thing to do. They're acting in good faith and they're using their judgment. They're doing the best they know how. And that is exactly where the problem is. Because when a system leaves room for interpretation, the outcome is not controlled. So now ask yourself, well, which one is correct? What is the expectation? What triggers escalation? What gets documented and how does it get documented? If that is not clearly defined, you don't have a process. You have three interpretations, and those interpretations create different levels of risk for the same resident. That is not acceptable in a care environment, and it should not be acceptable in any business, because consistency is what protects the outcome. Consistency is what protects the resident, and consistency only comes from a defined standard, not from individual judgment. In environments like this, interpretation is not just inefficient, it is exposure. Inconsistent inputs lead to inconsistent outcomes, and inconsistent outcomes lead to risk. This, my friends, is not a people problem, it's a structure problem. Now think about what that does to training and accountability and performance, because you cannot train inconsistency and you cannot hold people accountable to something that is not clearly defined. And you can't scale a business that operates differently depending on the day. That is the environment that most of our small businesses are in, however. And that's the environment that this system that we created was designed to improve. So, why does this system actually work? Well, because it does something most businesses avoid. It forces definition before action. It does not allow the business to move forward on assumptions. It requires the business to answer what exactly is happening, what should happen instead, and what does good look like specifically. And once that is defined, everything changes, because now decisions are no longer personal, they're structural. Training is no longer reactive, it is anchored, and documentation is no longer optional, it is operational. Inconsistent inputs create inconsistent results. Defined inputs create reliable outcomes. That is not an AI concept, that is an operations principle. And AI, well, it becomes predictable, not because it has changed, but because the inputs we put in became consistent. Once we understand that, then we stop chasing the next hyped AI tool that we see on social media, and we start building systems, because your AI, my friends, is only as good as the system you've created for it to operate in. Now, let's bring this back to you, leaders, because this is where leadership either shifts or gets stuck. If your business is currently relying on people to ask when they're not sure, or handle things the way they usually do, or figure it out as the situation arises, then your business is dependent on interpretation. And for as long as that is true, you will stay in the middle of everything, answering questions, fixing inconsistencies, and clarifying decisions after the fact. And not because your team isn't capable, but because the system isn't clear. This is the shift. Your job is not to have all the answers. Your job is to remove the need for constant interpretation. Because when interpretation goes down, consistency goes up. And when consistency goes up, performance stabilizes. That's how real operations improve, not with more effort, but with better structure. Now, here's how to use this. This video is your orientation. It defines the system. The 16 sessions in session 1 of the RockstarBoss15 series shows how to apply this system step by step in real business scenarios. So if you're looking at your business right now and thinking, well, we could use a better level of clarity, start with this series. Work through each session. Use them to build this structure into your operation. Because understanding the system is one thing. Operating with it is something entirely different. And that's where most businesses fall short. Not because the system doesn't work, but because it never becomes part of how the business actually runs. Because once the system is clear, the next step is making sure your business can actually operate with it. So in the next session, we're going to take this one step further. We're going to talk about what it takes to make this system stick across managers, across departments, across real situations. But if your team doesn't use it consistently, then nothing will actually change. We're not here, friends, for temporary improvements. We are here to build something your business can actually run on, because better systems build better workplaces.